Hi everyone, my name is Armalene Matson and I'm a software engineer with IBM TRIRIGA. For this T-Tech, I'll be going over two new UX components that both deal with navigation, and they're called triblock-side-nav and triblock-tabs. So before we move on to the features overview in the demo, I wanted to explain the top two reasons why these components were created. The first reason is for reusability, which means easier to maintain code on the platform end and less code for application developers. The second reason is for consistency. You'll notice that there's already a default TRIRIGA style applied to these components. This will allow the application developers to focus on functionality instead of styling, which can be done at the end or as you go. So you'll notice that triblock-side-nav and triblock-tabs are just both a collection of navigation items. They both have the same behaviors where you tap on the activity side nav item or the activity tab, and it'll lead you to either a routed page or an iron page. Um, you'll notice that although they have these same behaviors, they have a different layout and different styles applied to them, and that's adheres to the TRIRIGA style guide. Inside triblock-side-nav and triblock-tab, you'll be able to define your navigation item, triblock-side-nav item and triblock-tab respectively. You'll be able to specify an icon, a label, and a badge, as you can see here on this screenshot. You don't always have to have an icon and a label. You could have either or. Another thing that's cool about these building block components, they come with a layout component that you can wrap around your navigation group and the pages that they're routing to. So they're called triblock-side-nav layout and triblock-tabs layout. So triblock-side-nav layout has your navigation items on the left and then your content on the right, where the tabs have the navigation items on the top and then content below it. I also wanted to cover documentation for these components. You can find the documentation for both triblock-side-nav and triblock-tabs in the p/web/doc on your environment, on your TRIRIGA environment, and you can access this through your browser. There's going to be a lot of descriptions, the detailed descriptions, a demo page for each component, and an API documentation. So the demo is split into three parts. The first part is a features demo. I'll have a sample app ready that shows these features fully implemented. The second part is implementing triblock-side-nav and triblock-tabs, and we'll be learning how to do these items. And the last part is troubleshooting. I've included tips on how to debug, some helpful documentation that you guys can go through, and some configuration issues, common configuration issues with these new components. So let's get started with our demo. So I've pulled up our sample app. We've got three tabs with three pages to match. I've got a lorem ipsum sample text and variations of the lorem ipsum sample text. We are able to customize the icon and the label for a tab. We're able to specify a badge label, and here we've tapped on the tab and it's called a function that I've configured, and it pops up this alert. And we've configured a badge number with a badge max number here, which I'll go into during our implementation. We've also got routing set up between these tabs. So there's a path that changes every time I click on a tab. So the content changes and the path changes. Also, there's a transition animation that happens between selections. This is part of the primary triblock tab, so this will come as part of the styling for your tabs if you choose the primary attribute. Something to note as well, which isn't very apparent in this demo, is we're using a triblock-nav layout to have the tabs at the top and the content display at the bottom. I've also got a sample app set up for the side nav. It's configured pretty much the same. We've got 3 side nav items with 3 pages. We've also got icons and labels and badges configured as well. We've also got routing and this tab handler. Since the configuration between triblock-tabs and triblock-side-nav is so similar, we're only going to be working on implementing triblock-tabs, and then I'll explain the differences between the two during a later part of the demo. So let's open up our text editor. I've got a basic starter view. I've already imported all the necessary components. I have just the basic style applied, and it looks like we're ready to get started. Let's load up this view. I've got this TTC tab sandbox. I'll refresh. Looks like it's blank. We'll get started with displaying one tab, and we'll do that by putting triblock-tabs, and inside it we'll put triblock-tab. Let's give it an ID, an icon from our IBM icon set, and a label. So this is pretty basic. It should just show up. Looks like it's lorem ipsum, so looks good there. We need to display the other 3 tabs. I've already got that ready for the interest of time. Let me format this. We'll preview it. So we've got our 3 tabs displayed at the top. The next thing we need to do is specify badges. So in our original sample app, we've got a badge label for buzzword ipsum and it says new. We'll go ahead and do that. So the difference between a badge label and a badge number is a badge label is a string. Technically you can put in a 2 here, and you would be fine, and you wouldn't need to use badge number. But the whole purpose of badge number and badge max number is it has logic to display either the badge max number or the actual badge number. So we'll specify the badge label to new, and let's go back to our sample app. Our badge is 99. We'll specify that here. We'll put our badge max number because we already know what it is. It's 99. It will not go above 99 because it displays a 99 and a plus over here. And we can just put an arbitrary number for the badge number. Let's go through some scenarios. Let's do 100, just 27. So our badge label showed up and our badge number has showed up. So right now it displays 27. Our badge max number is 99. Let's change this to 99 and see what it does. So it still displays 99. So 99 is the maximum. If we went up to 100, it'll start saying 99 plus, and that's exactly what we want. Now the next thing next on our agenda is to manage selections. Now sometimes you might need to tap on a tab and find out, well, which tab did I select? And this is helpful for knowing what record. Let's say you have dynamic tabs, and each tab is a floor, and each floor has a record ID, and you need that record ID. um, you'll be able to get it and set it using selection management. So right now nothing is selected on load. If I tap on lorem ipsum, it automatically makes it dark, indicating that it's tapped, and then there's an underline. But if I refresh the page, nothing is selected. So let's make it by default select lorem ipsum. By default, you've got this property selected, and you can set it to a tab. So here I'm saying the selected tab on load will be lorem ipsum tab, and lorem ipsum tab is the ID of the triblock-tab element. So let's select something different, and we'll refresh. On refresh, it goes back to lorem ipsum, so that's exactly what we want. Now let's say you don't actually you want to be able to find out what tab is selected. That's where selected becomes a getter. So instead of having selected here, instead of specifying it, I'll just add a Z so that it no longer recognizes that this is a proper attribute. I'll put selected. I'll store it in a property. We'll print out that property just to see what's in it. So if I tap on a tab, I should see lorem ipsum tab here. So I'm printing out the selected tab. So it returns the ID of the tab that I tapped on. This is great. So now what we want to do is fix this initial selection problem. Now that we've used the selected property to get our selected tab, we need to be able to specify what the first tab will be. And you can do that using initial selection. So initial selection is a property for triblock-tab. So right now I'm saying when on load, select lorem ipsum tab. So just the first tab. So I'm kind of just showing you different ways to configure selected tabs. So there are different properties and different combinations of these properties that you'll see as we demo. Another thing you can do in terms of managing selections for tabs is to specify the attribute for selected property. So this basically says I don't want to use the ID of the triblock tab as the selected property. Instead, let's say I want to use the label. So in our example earlier, so selected tab, we're printing out the selected tab as we tap on each tab, and this returned lorem ipsum tab. Instead of returning lorem ipsum tab, which is the ID of that triblock tab, it'll now return lorem ipsum, the label. So let's give that a shot. So it's returned our label lorem ipsum instead of the camel cased ID. So this is useful if you stored the record ID, instead of setting it as the ID of the element, you stored it in a TRIRIGA record ID property that you've added. That's one scenario you would use this attribute for selected. But for now, we won't need this attribute for selected. Let's just comment that out. Now moving on to our next topic, we want to be able to display iron pages with each tab. So I've got some iron pages ready for us. It has the ID of ipsum pages, and each page also has an ID. We'll be using them in a similar way with the triblock-tab IDs that we specified earlier. So let's see if that renders. So it looks like, although we've put iron pages on there, it's not being rendered on the screen. So what we'll do is we'll inspect and we'll find that iron pages isn't taking up any space. Again, for the interest of time, let's fast forward this debugging session. In the end, we find out that this worked with our styling and our current layout. So it's still not showing anything. We'll go ahead and inspect. Iron pages is taking up space now, but it looks like none of these are being selected. So now we do some configuration with iron pages with triblock-tabs. We will have to specify the iron pages ID in triblock-tabs, and that'll be ipsum pages. And for each triblock-tab, we need to specify the iron page ID for that tab. So let's see if that works. So now the pages are rendering, which is great. We'll go ahead and click on buzzword ipsum. That navigates well. So each page is navigating to where we need it to be. So to recap, we need to specify iron pages ID and iron page ID for both triblock-tabs and triblock-tab. And remember, you have to have an ID specified for these elements in order to make it work. So we'll move on to the next section, which is configuring navigation, but this time with triplat route. Let's undo our changes for the iron pages ID just to make sure that our navigation is indeed coming from triplat route and not from the iron pages that we set up. So this kind of brings us back to square one before the iron pages ID stuff. So that looks good. Missed one right there. For triplat routing, we'll have to define our routes. So I've got those ready. I've also found that there's a layout problem here as well. I noticed that when I wrap iron pages with triplat route selector, which I'll do real quick. this also doesn't take up space. Notice that triplock route selector doesn't have a height, but it has a width. So we'll fast forward again, debugging the styles and the layout, and you find that this works. I've added the triplock route selector, and then I just put in layout flex and layout vertical, just like iron pages up here. Then we'll inspect and debug. Triplock route selector now has a height, so that's great. But now no iron pages is showing up. So what we'll do is continue configuring the triplock route. For the triblock tab, we'll need to add the triplock route ID. And this is the ID of the triplock route that you defined up here. Not the name, but the ID. That some people have issues remembering whether or not it's ID or name. I've mistakenly used name, so hopefully you guys don't. So we've set up our triplock route ID here. Well, another thing that we need to do, this is actually part of configuring the routes, triplock routing, and not necessarily part of configuring the tabs. So this is sort of a separate module, but it's just set up. Notice that this is now the route name. So this matches the name, and we're not using the ID here. So it looks like we're getting lorem ipsum on the lorem ipsum tab and everything else. So it looks, the routing looks good. The difference between using iron pages versus using triplock routing is we've got this context, this URL path change. So now that we've got triplock routing configured, we'll work on calling a function on tab. So let's go back to our code. What we'll want to do is for the third tab, we'll specify a tap handler. And I'll grab that function. So we'll call this function when this tab is tapped. So once I hit bacon ipsum, I get an alert and it says nav item tapped. So this is useful for if you have any pre-processing to do anytime you load a page for that tab. That's a super common use case. There are other scenarios where they've prepped some data, so it only refreshes a data source when that tab is tapped. Or when the tab is tapped, it filters. Instead of getting all the active and draft and history requests, you only get draft or active or history. So anything that you can do on a JavaScript function, it'll be called on this tap. Moving to configuring nav layouts, what we'll do is we'll put in that nav layout, the triblock-tab-nav layout, and it's a wrapper for both your tabs and for your pages. In this case, it's triblock-tabs and triplock route selector. In order for the styling to work, you'll have to specify which is which. So triblock-tabs is the nav group that we're using, so we indicate this by using nav attribute. And then for pages, we'll put page attribute for the triplock route selector. Now, I mentioned earlier that the triblock-tab nav layout and then its counterpart for side nav will eliminate any layout styling that we've done here. So let's try commenting this out and let's see if everything still works. So all of our styling is gone, and it's still styled the way we expect it to, which is tabs on the top and content on the bottom. We'll just need to do a minor repair over here to add the padding back. So just to recap, specify using nav attribute and page attribute for the nav group and the pages. So using triblock-tab nav layout is super useful, especially if you're trying to do a quick POC. There will be some scenarios where this will not work. If you have any complex layouts that you've got in your pages, you might want to start using just this manual layouts that I've specified here. So it just depends on what you need and how complicated it is inside these pages. So our last topic for this implementation part of the demo is styling. Now there are two ways to affect styling. There is a styling section in the triblock-tabs documentation at pwebdoc. These are just a bunch of mix-ins with a description of what they override and the default value. So you'll be able to customize depending on what you need. It's a long list, so you should be able to be open to many options. Another way that we've affected styling is some properties. So we'll go ahead and get these in our code. So there's fit container, hide scroll buttons, and primary. So let's try primary. We've differentiated primary tabs versus secondary tabs. Primary is just more is bigger, and secondary tabs are for content. So primary tabs would be headers. Oops. So notice that we've got a long bar at the top now, and it's all blue, and we've still got our regular tabs. We'll try a couple more properties. We'll try fit container, and what this does is it flexes the entire all these tabs to fill the space of the width. And the last property is hide scroll buttons. In our sample, notice that there's this gap between the edge and the first tab, and it's the same for the last tab as well. Hiding the scroll buttons will get rid of those gaps, but also once the window gets small enough, you won't be able to see the scroll buttons, and instead you'll just be able to scroll using by dragging your cursor or your finger if you're using a mobile phone or mobile device. So let's put in the final touches for styling. We've got those color changes for the top tabs. All I'm doing here is changing the background color to gray, the tab unselected color to gray, and the selected color to black. We also had that left margin issue, so we'll fix that right now as well. And now our implementation should be just the same as the sample app. So moving on to the troubleshooting part of the demo, I've mentioned the documentation a lot at p/web/doc, It's super helpful. It has detailed descriptions. You've got examples here. You've also got access to the API with properties and methods that you can use. Um, we've also got, depending on what component you're accessing, we've also got events that are exposed for you to listen to, and then any other behaviors that are used for these components. Triblock-side-nav also has a page, and this is where you'll find differences between triblock-side-nav and triblock-tabs. For example, you've got, for triblock-side-nav item, you'll notice that there is a disabled attribute where triblock-tabs doesn't. So if something doesn't work on triblock-tabs that does work on triblock-side-nav item, just go through the documentation to make sure that it's implemented for both. Some more documentation you can reference is paper tabs and paper menu. So this is the triblock-tabs source code, and what we essentially do is take the triblock tab inside the triblock tabs, and for each triblock tab we generate a paper tab for it, and it's the same with triblock-side-nav. So if you find yourself having issues, like things are not updating, or the label is wrong, or there may have been an issue with paper tabs that you're seeing here in triblock tabs, it will be helpful for you guys to look through the documentation, and you've also got access to their source as well as any issues that have come up. So the next two sections are covering some more advanced known issues of triblock tabs and triblock-side-nav. So first we'll go through a scenario for dynamic tabs. So this is in group move. We have an implementation that uses dynamic tabs where we've got floors and we iterate through them and we create a triblock tab for each floor. Now, there are two issues that you may find. Either it doesn't render at all, so these tabs that you see up here, they're either going to be blank but you'll still be able to click on them, or it doesn't update. Let's say you remove floor 1 and this ends up still being floor 1, or you remove floor 3 and it ends up still showing floor 3, or ends up showing floor 2. So we've put in some functions that'll hopefully help with this issue. We've added a refresh delay property, and what this does is it delays for however many milliseconds you specified here, and refreshes after those milliseconds have passed. So it just gives a chance for any pre-processing that you're doing with the data to catch up, and then we'll refresh the tabs afterwards. Something helpful is, and something else that you could do is use this function, the refresh tabs function. So what happens in group move is at the end of this function, add building floor, it calls refresh tabs because this is the pre-processing that's being done before the tabs are actually rendered. So find the function that does a lot of your data source massaging, I guess, and at the very end, call refresh tabs so you've got the latest data. So a common issue that you might encounter for triblock-side-nav actually happens in our sample layout for the side-nav component. We've got a new text here. This new text, it looks like it doesn't fit inside the badge. So we're going to use mixins to fix this issue. So we're just gonna uncomment it as we go. So we've got triblock-side-nav, and I've got some mixins that I'm about to use. What I'll do is change the badge label width, which is the white part here, increase it to 30. I'll also change the margin of the badge label. So that's the space between the center of the icon or label um, and the beginning of the badge. And then I'm increasing the triblock-side-nav width just so that it doesn't feel like everything is cramped in here. So we'll refresh. Notice that our nav got bigger. Our nav items, icon and label, are always centered. So keep that in mind. And then notice that it used to be closer to the middle. This new badge label was closer to the middle, and now it's indented out to the side. So that's one way that you could fix any long labeled badges that you have. So we've reached the end of this T-Tech, this demo and overview. So I'll leave you with this reference slide. We've got the Developer Works link for the wiki and the forums, and we've got the link for previous releases of T-Tech. If you've got any questions about triblock-side-nav or triblock-tabs or any suggestions, your feedback is super important. So it'll help us improve your development experience if you post on DeveloperWorks, and we can continue the conversation there, whether you're running into an issue or you have a suggestion that would make these components better. So feel free to leave us feedback there. Again, this is Armalene Matson, and this is the T-Tech for triblock-side-nav and triblock-tabs. Thanks for watching.